please, please, please put down the pitchforks and just hear me out for this one, okay? So, before I really get going here, I just wanted to let you know where I'm coming from. I'm not a hater. I love Star Wars. And I actually saw Rogue One the very night it opened. But here's the thing is I've spent the last decade feeling absolutely insane. No more so than that very first night walking out of the theater and hearing everybody else say that it was the best Star Wars movie ever. And I was just standing there with my friends, not saying anything, being like, um, that movie was actually really bad. And maybe saying really bad is too harsh. I mean, the prequels are really bad. And trust me, especially the second two, oh God. But that's also not the point of this video. The point is to say that I walked out of Rogue One feeling like I'd really missed something, that I was just the dumb one because how could it be possible that everyone else could have this opinion and I was one of the few who didn't like it? So, for the last decade, I've kind of been second guessing my judgment, but the problem when you don't enjoy a movie is that it's pretty hard to motivate yourself to watch it again. But now it's been a full 10 years, and I decided that it was more than enough time to give Rogue One, a Star Wars story, second chance. And I mean, I started this video by begging you to put the pitchforks down, so you can probably already guess how I felt about it. With that being said, I'm not a person who really enjoys tearing things down. I know a lot of people just went ham on hating the sequel movies, and I'm sure there were a lot of reasons for that. And hey, I'm not even saying that every decision was good. It was not. However, I still found myself enjoying those movies, and I did not enjoy Rogue One either time. But because I don't want to just be a hater, I decided to do this video in the form of a delicious compliment sandwich. All right, so it's not actually a traditional compliment sandwich where you put one mean thing between two nice things. What I'm actually going to be doing is making a petty complaint, then an actual critique, and then say a nice thing and repeat like that. Obviously, big spoilers for Rogue One. If you haven't seen it, I don't think you'd even be here. I'm not going to be doing a plot summary. This is just going to be hitting the points that I want to talk about. Ready? Let's go. Petty complaint number one, the introduction. So we got Jyn Erso's childhood as this little prologue, and I'm going to talk about that more in a different point. But what I wanted to say is that the opening scene of the movie absolutely should have been Cassian's first scene. The scene where he's meeting up with the guy with the broken arm, and they're having that stressful, transaction, and then the guards show up and Cassian shoots him. That tells us more about a character and builds a better story in what, like 2 minutes than that entire 10-minute intro did with Jyn and her family. Real critique number one. At the beginning of the movie, we see Jyn's mom, Lyra, give Jyn a necklace with a kyber crystal on it, and the camera even lingers on the shot of her holding it up, and Jyn puts it on. And I remember the first time I saw the movie being annoyed that I felt like it didn't pay off. And so I was like, okay, maybe I missed something because I, again, only did watch it the one time in theaters on opening night. Um, but no, it never really comes back up. Like you do see it a few more times, I think maybe twice more, but doesn't do anything, doesn't really have any special meaning. Honestly, it kind of feels like something that was done for the sake of the audience and not for the sake of the characters or the storyline. Because even though kyber crystals are brought up in their points of the story, and I will actually be bringing them up in another point, I don't see what this had to do with anything. And it was just one of those things where it's like Chekhov's gun, right? If you're going to introduce it and you're going to remind us about it when Jin pulls it out right before they take their little group of mercenaries to the base, it's like, you never shot anybody with it, Jin, so what the heck? That drove me nuts. It drives me nuts. Nice thing number one. So, this movie has no opening crawl. It starts similarly to the other Star Wars movies, where you kind of have a shot of the stars and everything, but then they pan right down to the planet. And I thought that that was a really good decision because Rogue One is only telling a sliver of a much larger story, and because it's a story that we already know. So there would be no point to the opening crawl, which is really meant to catch the audience up to whatever Star War we're in, to quote Jenny Nicholson. So I think that if they had tried to include an opening crawl, it would have felt really forced, and I'm really glad they didn't. So great job, guys. Petty complaint number two. When the pilot Bodhi is picked up by Saw Gerrera's men, and he has the bag put over his head, and then they take off. As they're taking off, the camera pans back really far, and we see that there's sort of like an island or a landmass or something, and it appears to be in the shape of maybe old Obi-Wan Kenobi or maybe old Luke Skywalker lying down, like with a hood up and holding a lightsaber, but like sideways. And I just, again, like what was the point of that? Okay, so at this point, The Force Awakens was a thing, and so my guess is that it is supposed to be old Luke, but then like why? What is this foreshadowing? Like, is it supposed to be like, oh, this is the foreshadowing that Luke Skywalker will be the one to blow up the Death Star? Because if that's the case, why would they show it as an old man? Why wouldn't it be young Luke Skywalker when he actually does it? I just, why? I don't understand. Real criticism number two. I already kind of talked about the prologue and being mad that it was a big waste of time. It actually takes up just over 10 minutes of the movie, and I know you're probably thinking that that doesn't sound like a lot. You have to remember when a movie is around 2 hours, actually, I was going to say only 2 hours, but 2 hours is too long. Movies need to learn how to be more concise and less filler, you know? This would make the story so much stronger. I am getting off track. The prologue is like, in my opinion, a waste of time because we don't get enough time with any of those characters to really make it worth it. And we don't really learn anything that we couldn't have learned later in the movie, especially because they decided to waste more time putting flashbacks of like Tiny Jin hiding and like being rescued by Saw Gerrera. And like, what was the point of any of that? My biggest complaint about this is actually why Lyra came back with the gun when Galen had already lied about the fact that she was dead and that there was no kid. And like, Lyra and Jin had already escaped, they were already gone. And then Lyra comes back with the gun threatening to shoot Krennic and then gets herself killed. And it's like, okay, I understand that you wanted to save your husband, but the thing is that like he was already being like surrounded by like a small platoon of stormtroopers or whichever type of troopers those are with the creepy masks. Um, Sorry, that probably wasn't helpful. It just they have like sort of like gas masky looking things, and gas masks really freak me out. Anyways, I don't think that if she was the way that she was portrayed in like the 2 seconds that we got to know her, she would care more about saving Galen than she would care about saving Jin, especially when Galen is a grown man who can presumably handle himself, and she just left Jin, her tiny, like what, like 8-year-old child to just die or like be in that tiny little bunker by herself and like maybe Saw Gerrera would come and get her. You know what I mean? Again, I feel like I didn't miss anything. It doesn't make any sense why Lyra would have come back and like threatened to shoot Krennic and then not even shot him. Like at least she could have done something, you know? It was like just a really weak moment overall for like no payoff. Nice thing I can say, number two. Mads Mikkelsen is fantastic. And no, that is not news. And yes, he is amazing in everything that he acts in. And no, I'm not just saying that because he is a total DILF or GILF, depending on how old you are. So, yeah, no, he's just a really great actor and he totally carries like every scene he's in. He was the pretty much only like compelling actor on the Imperial side, in my opinion. Oh, and fun fact, just for the heck of it, Mads Mikkelsen's brother, Lars Mikkelsen, actually plays the Vladimir Putin analog on the American Netflix House of Cards. Petty complaint number three. This one is about the music that they use for the first half of the movie. See, at just past the halfway point, maybe a little further, when, you know, those X-Wings show up, we get the triumphant Star Wars score, and yeah, it feels pretty good. But for the whole movie leading up to that, the music that was being used was like just off. Like as if somebody had taken the Star Wars score, but then just like changed it a little bit, just enough to be part of like some kind of unlicensed Broadway musical or like for a fan film or something. It's, I don't know how to describe it, but it just, when it hits the ear wrong. Real critique number three. Forrest Whitaker's character, Saw Gerrera. This man, just the most garbage job at introducing this character, by the way. Like, he just shows up and is in a few places, and you never get a good sense of his significance or who he even is to Jin. And to be honest, I totally thought he was just a throwaway character for the movie, like pretty much all the other characters. And then I found out apparently this character is from the TV show Rebels. Now, I'm going to be making some Rebels fans and probably some Clone Wars fans pretty mad when I say this, but no, stop. I will die on the hill that you cannot use the excuse that, oh, they fixed that or they explained that in a TV show. Your movie cannot rely on a TV show to fix plot mistakes or character mistakes or whatever other holes that you need to patch or whatever. You can absolutely use a TV show to add to the existing canon. You can do great extra stuff, but if I ever hear the words, oh, well, that makes sense if you watch the TV show, no. No, just no, okay? You cannot fix a movie retrospectively with a TV show. No. I'm not saying Clone Wars or Rebels are not good shows. That's a completely separate conversation. I'm saying that you can't use them to justify anything about any of the movies. Nice thing I can say at number three. This movie uses so many awesome practical alien costumes and practical props, and because it's actually set right before episode 4, it actually really makes sense that they would go back to the old style of filming. Obviously, when you have the original trilogy having been made, you know, the first two in the 70s, you know, you have the limitations of the time. And then we had the prequels, which were really like way too smooth and CGI, and just like you could tell that the whole thing was shot on a green screen. And I think that this in Rogue One was a really nice return to form in terms of the practical aliens. Petty complaint number four. K2SO is just honestly to me a completely lazy knockoff of C3PO. Look, I can see their obvious differences. I understand the significance of C3PO having been built by Anakin and everything. I do understand that part, okay? But what is the knockoff is the role that it plays and the everything else about it. Like, okay, yes, K2SO is a lot more sassy. um Unfortunately, whatever joy I would have gotten from his sassiness was completely destroyed by the fact that every time he made what might have been a decent joke, they had to repeat it like 2 or 3 times. And it really just made me think back to Jenny Nicholson's video about Pirates of the Caribbean when she was like, did you think I fell asleep? Like, that's really how I felt about every K2SO joke. Also, did they really need to make his recurring joke about like probability? Like, oh, the odds of survival or the chances of making it. Like, that was literally already C3PO's thing. Could you really not give a droid any other trait or characteristic? Real critique number 4. So, this one I kind of feel mean saying because I don't want to hate on anybody unnecessarily, but I really think that Jyn Erso was miscast. The actress just brings absolutely nothing to the table in terms of the character. He is so wooden, just complete cardboard the whole time. Even when she's crying, she's not really making me believe any of it. And she has scenes with these two masters of moving emotional dialogue. You know, she has that scene with Forrest Whitaker where he asks if she's come to kill him, and they're kind of having this like, are you joking? Are you not joking? And like, it's like, are you gonna kill me? Am I joking? Are you not? And I actually thought that that little speech he gave was like, like a really good performance, one of the better performances in the movie. And then she's just like, hmm. And then they just move on. And it's like, oh, okay. I just don't know why you would pick such a bland, forgettable actor to play a brand new protagonist. Like, it obviously tells you something that Cassian was the one who got the show after Rogue One, right? The actress playing Jin just to me feels like somebody who is acting at like a high school play level and not a Hollywood blockbuster level, especially a Hollywood blockbuster with a name like Star Wars attached to it. I just, it really sucks when Star Wars has always been filled with these characters who really resonate. And yeah, even in the prequels, you have characters who are really, really memorable, even if the movies aren't great. But there's just nothing to Jin. Nice thing to say, number 4. Chirrut Imwe and Baze Malbus, who they do a terrible job introducing and whose names I had to look up after the fact because they really only say Chirrut's name once, and I don't know if they ever introduce Baze by his name. Anyways, the nice thing I want to say about them is that they do have some really great interactions. I love a odd couple dynamic. I adore a sort of sunshine and rain cloud characters, living together and making it work. And yeah, I thought that they had some really fun moments, especially when Chirrut is like, ah, the Force protected me, and Baze is like, I protected you. Petty complaint number 5. The completely unnecessary cameo of the two aliens that Luke and Obi-Wan meet in the cantina in A New Hope. And when I say completely unnecessary cameo, what I mean is that you're already doing this movie with so many new characters who nobody knows and who are not getting enough screen time as it is. And then you're gonna spend this time to like have your bland main character bump into these two characters who ultimately mean nothing because it's a callback to the Invisible Audience from a movie that came out in the 70s. And like, okay, I'm all for fan service. I'm not even mad about like little drops of fan service here and there. That's fun, you know, you want to please your fans. And I may have been more forgiving of it if it had been the only fan service, but it is not, and I am going to get to that in a bit. Okay, here we go. Real critique number 5. Why in the ever-loving frick-frack would they bother introducing a brand new villain, Krennic, when they already had so many villains that they were going to use? I mean, Tarkin was already going to be there. Clearly, they have him. They went to the trouble of CGIing him into a bunch of scenes. And it's like, oh, well, he couldn't be the main villain because doing all that CGI would have been too expensive. First of all, that's insane because it's Star Wars, it's Disney. You had enough money. But second of all, that is a bad excuse because what you should have done is found an actor who kind of looked like Peter Cushing and then put some prosthesis on him and then use CGI to just do the last little touch-ups like they do on other stuff when like actors pass or need to have like body doubles or whatever. Like lots of movies do this kind of thing without trouble. Okay, so you have Tarkin, who is already Krennic's superior, and who, in every scene he appears in with Krennic, completely emasculates him and makes him look and feel like an idiot, right? And so it's like, okay, well, maybe you wanted to tell the story of like an Imperial soldier who like is emasculated, but then like rises up the ranks against and gets his position and gets whatever. But like we know Tarkin isn't going to die because he's in A New Hope, and like that's not happened yet in the movie universe. And then they introduce Darth Vader, and I'm going to talk about Darth Vader in another point, okay? So just you hold your horses. But introducing Vader makes it even more unforgivable that they would create a new villain in Krennic, because what do you mean? Now you have so many higher ranking people, and it's like, okay, I get that Vader is sort of like the big bad who you don't want to use right away, and obviously I get that, but also like in that case, then you shouldn't have had him in the movie at all until that very end scene, which I think, honestly, as a script doctor, I would suggest doing. Like, if I had to work with the movie that I have right now, I would absolutely cut out everything with Vader until the very last scene because that's what would make the impact, right? At least I think that that's what makes the impact. Um, I think I'm going to say the rest about Vader in the point that I have about him. But do you see what I'm saying about Krennic? It's like we don't know who he is. We don't have long enough in the movie to learn anything about him. I mean, if you wanted to do like people who are under Tarkin, then you could have just spread that role out among like a bunch of like lower ranking Imperial officers, in my opinion. Having like this new bad guy who's all in white and who looks completely different than everybody else because he's so cool. And it's like, okay, but like he means nothing and he does ultimately nothing. And he's not scary, and every other villain he interacts with is way scarier than him. So, what are we doing here? Nice thing I can say, number 5, and this is actually about Vader too, and it is that I actually love Sassy Vader, okay? I think that Vader was at his absolute best when he was, you know, cracking wise and doing the things that were not so much dark and edgelord the way he became after New Hope. They kind of changed his personality a bit. And I am just living for like Vader with like a attitude, you know what I mean? I'm here for it. That is something that I loved. So I know I just said that I would cut all the Vader scenes, and if I was trying to make a better movie, I still would. But since I'm trying to say something nice about the movie that currently exists, I will say that I'm glad that the lines they did give Vader were awesome, like the poking on your ambition stuff. Petty complaint number 6. Okay, this one really does feel pretty petty. In the scene where all the rebel or alliance leaders are standing in that round room and they're trying to decide what to do, there's Mon Calamari in there. And he is so heavily CGI'd, just sticks out like a sore thumb. And it's weird because I was just saying how they had done so much better with all the practical alien costumes and props. I just, again, it's really petty. It just took me completely out of the scene. Real criticism number 6. How can I put this simply? There's just way too much repetition in the fight scene at the end. Like, basically, as soon as the X-Wings show up and we get the nice Star Wars score, and it's like, yay, exciting, we have our air support. And, like, it's just too much. There's too much to the point that it's boring. Like, how did you guys manage to make space dogfights boring? But you did. Because here's the thing, and I will again quote my patron saint, Jenny Nicholson, that if you're making a movie and you already know the outcome, you have to make the stakes something other than life and death. We already know what happens in New Hope. So, since we already know that this mission is going to succeed, they needed to create some other stakes, some emotional stakes, or some character-driven stakes, or something additional to the canon. Because, like, it's hard to have an all is lost moment when you know that all is not lost because they're gonna succeed because the original movies already happened. And I realize that some people are probably like, oh, but like, you can still be sad about the characters that, we've been following, like the main ensemble. And it's like, yeah, okay, but again, let me restate the issue that none of these characters really got enough screen time to be emotionally connected with. The only person who feels like they got enough characterization at all is Diego Luna, Cassian, and I'm guessing he brought a lot of that himself. I don't know that anyone else in this movie was directed strongly enough to bring any real depth to their characters. They all just felt really one-dimensional, and so, yeah, because there's no stakes to the fighting is just agonizingly boring, like to the point where I was actually tabbing ahead through all those dog fights. Oh, and just one last thought on that is like, it's egregious how much time they wasted on so much repetitive space fights and gunfights and explosions when they could have been using any of that time to again set up stakes or make us attached to the characters that we're following for this whole movie. But yeah, they didn't do that. So nice thing to say, number 6. In the scene in the canyon, the same scene where Galen Urso dies, Chirrut Imwe has this thing that fires bowcaster bolts and it shoots big explodey arrows. And I thought that was really cool, especially as somebody who really loves doing archery. I was just like, that would be my weapon if I wasn't a Jedi or a Sith and I didn't have a lightsaber. I would love that bowcaster thingy. Petty complaint number 7. This is something that I know I kind of talked about with the whole characters that Luke and Obi-Wan meet in the cantina, but like the fan service is just, it's too much, especially in this one scene where, right after the rebels have decided not to do anything, and then Cassian gets all like that one group of guys together to like go with Jin and they steal the ship and everything. Yeah. So right after that, we have a scene with the guy who plays Amy's dad on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Is he supposed to be Bail Organa? Because I wasn't paying close enough attention to notice, but I just recognize the actor. Anyways, he is talking to that lady with the short hair and the long white dress, who is also from the original trilogy. We see her multiple times, I believe. But then in the background, right before the scene cuts away, there is like a little like tinny announcement on the overhead speakers for Captain Antilles to report somewhere. Antilles, like Wedge, like Luke's friend Wedge Antilles. Guys, like, I would have actually thought that it was a pretty cool Easter egg if it had just been the announcement that, like, was in the background right before the cut, just quietly, like, Captain Antilles, please report, blah, blah. That would have been fine. It's just that it was layered on top of stuff, and at a certain point, it's like triple chocolate fudge. You're just like, oh my God, I'm like, it's like it's an overwhelming amount of fan service now. It's taking away from an original piece of work. Real critique number 7. It feels really heavy-handed for Jin to actually say the words to Cassian that, like, he says, I was just following orders. And then she's like, oh, so you follow orders even when you know that they're wrong? And it's like, okay, guys, like, did you not trust the audience to understand any subtext? Like, do you not think that your audience is already getting the message of these movies, especially this movie? They're treating us like we've never encountered Star Wars before. Like, we don't understand that, like, there's nuance to the light and the dark side. Like, that's kind of been most of the morals of all the movies almost, like, is that, like, there is nuance, you can find good and bad and good, and, like, the other thing is that, like, Sturmtruppen was actually, like, the real name for soldiers in Germany during the Second World War and leading up to the Second World War. I don't know if I can say the word, but, like, the NCI word. But yeah, Sturmtruppen, I hope I'm saying that at least a little bit correctly, is like stormtrooper. It like they already called their soldiers stormtroopers. I don't know, it just feels really insulting when stuff like this happens because it's like, really, like, this is how you're spending your dialogue, is reinforcing the one thing that we should absolutely already know. Nice thing to say in number 7. Diego Luna is so dreamy and awesome. And yeah, he should have been the main character of this movie, and not just because his whispering is just like enough to turn me into a fairy puddle. If you really want to appreciate Diego Luna, just go watch Dirty Dancing Havana Nights. I know Andor is supposed to be really good, and it probably is. I understand that the shows have been fairly strong. However, um, yeah, Dirty Dancing, Havana Nights, petty complaints number 8. Shield gates. When did shield gates become a thing? Look, this is very petty because I don't want to be that guy who is like, oh, well, if they didn't say it before, then it definitely couldn't possibly exist. It's not possible that there were things that existed in the universe that we didn't see in the other movies. Like, of course, it's possible. It just struck me as extremely odd that with like all the other movies, we have come to understand that like planets have shield generators that are typically on the planet or the moon. I never, in my memory of watching the Star Wars movies many, many times, recall shield gate, especially one that functions the way that the one in Rogue One does. It just feels like a huge contrivance for additional, like, all is lost moment, because with Obi-Wan in A New Hope taking down the shields from the inside, and then in Return of the Jedi, they get the shields on Endor, or the Forest Moon of Endor, shut down from the inside. And so maybe they were just trying to do something different, but I didn't like it because why would just this one Imperial base have a shield gate? I just like it. Why would that be the case? I, I'm just curious what exactly caused this specific contrivance when like planetary shields are already really well established in the canon. Real critique number 8. Look, I understand that certain things may not be my place to speak on as a very white fairy, but I just can't get past how, in a fictional universe, they picked an Asian man to play a character who is basically every monk stereotype with like a bunch of stuff from different Asian cultures pulled out and then like packaged into one character. Here's the thing is that I'm glad if there's diversity in the cast. In fact, Rogue One has a wonderfully diverse cast. But I do still think it's important that we ask the questions if the diversity is actually being used respectfully to have real representation, or is it just being used as a way to perpetuate more stereotypes? I'm not even saying that this is something that was done maliciously, but it is just something that I think that we need to pay more attention to, because if we never call any attention to it, then it won't ever change. Nice thing to say, number 8. Okay, the moment on like the rebel slash alliance slash whatever base where Cassian says to Jin, like, welcome home. That was the singular moment that strummed my heartstrings. I gotta give it to them. Petty criticism number 9. I'm not entirely convinced that the scene after Saw Gerrera captures Bodhi the pilot and then gives him to that like psychic tentacle monster thing, I'm not convinced that that wasn't just a huge waste of time, because what was the point of any of that? Not only do we not actually get to see any part of the interaction with a tentacle monster except for like just it putting its tentacles like on Bodhi's face, but then even the thing that he says, the thing that Saw says, where he's like, oh, people tend to lose their minds. It's like, okay, and like Bodhi does like seem to have like been traumatized or had his mind affected when they see him in the cell next to them, but then Cassian is just like, hey, you're the pilot, right? And Bodhi's just like, pilot, pilot. Oh yeah, I'm the pilot. And then like everything is fine and it never comes up again. Do you see what I'm saying about how all of these things could have been used as opportunities for like better characterization or anything that would have set the stakes instead of just all these like weird little half vignettes? We didn't even get to see the good part of that thing driving him insane, so what was the point? Real critique number 9. I said I would come back to the kyber crystals, and here it is. Again, like the shield gate, I suppose that it is fair that things could exist in the universe that were never brought up in any of the other movies and that just aren't a very big deal, I guess. However, I do think that if you're going to treat something like it is a big deal, then you should probably actually make it a big deal, or else it just feels like a dropped plot thread. And on the planet where we meet Chirrut and Baze, they are harvesting kyber crystals, the Empire is. And that's like killing the planet, I think, is what they say. And they're going to use it to power their weapon, which turns out to be the Death Star. And I'm not necessarily even bothered that they never mentioned that the Death Star was powered by kyber crystals in the previous movies or like in the originals. What I'm mad about is that they make this big deal about kyber crystals in the first like third of the movie, and then they just never come back to it, and it never comes up again. And it's like, well, then like were you just like, was that whole bit about them mining the kyber crystals like just like effectively a space gas station? Like they were just stopping to grab some fuel for their big gun? Just seems like something that should have had more of a payoff, especially with Jin's necklace. Like it seemed like there was really something that was going to happen there, and then it just didn't. It just makes me mad. Nice thing to say. Number 9. It is the Darth Vader lightsaber fight scene at the end of the movie. It's so good. It's just so good. There's nothing really much more to say about it. It's amazing. Honestly, like I said before, I would have made this the only Darth Vader scene in the whole movie. But, oh, That that was certainly one way to get my blood pumping. 100% best part of the movie, if you have to ask me. Okay, petty criticism number 10. And I do think that this is probably the pettiest one of all. Um, Was Krennic asking for Galen Erso's text history supposed to be super scary? Because it's really the one moment that they give him where he's like sinisterly cast in shadow and he's actually finally delivering like a good, scary, like Imperial Commander performance where like basically they've figured out that Galen Erso sent something and then he's like, check all his transmissions. And then the Imperial soldiers are like, what? All of them? And he's like, check all of them. And that's just the space equivalent of him asking to look at your text message history. And I was just like, really? Like, that was the moment you chose to spend his, like, scariness? I just feel like that could have been better utilized, you know? My final real critique, number 10. I'm just really mad that so many people after The Force Awakens came out said that, oh, there was too much stuff like the original trilogy. And okay, maybe there was. I see things differently, but I'm willing to be wrong. I'm always willing to be wrong, but not about this. There was so much stuff that was made to be similar to the originals and stuff that was forced in and stuff that actively stopped the existing canon from being interesting or from adding new stuff to the canon in a way that worked or was interesting. Like, neither thing was done, and so people hated the sequel movies and they were like losing their absolute crap over Rogue One. And I'm like, really? Really, everybody? Like, at least The Force Awakens is fun. We can have other conversations about the other two movies in the sequel trilogy, okay? Because, like, I have a lot of nice things to say, I have criticisms to say, but overall, I found that those movies were at least fun, that I cared a lot more about the characters. The characters were much more rounded out. Unfortunately, J.J. Abrams undid a lot of it in The Rise of Skywalker, but again, that is a different conversation. Okay, let me give you the examples, right? So, I was just talking about the Kyber crystals. That's something that is from the existing canon, as is the Death Star. And there was an opportunity to just like make a cool addition to the existing canon by tying together the Kyber crystals and the Death Star and making some interesting connection or some cool new Star Wars trivia. But they didn't take it anywhere, it didn't go anywhere, so it's just useless. And as for adding original stuff, they created a brand new villain and then made him completely pointless. And the stakes didn't mean anything because we already knew what the end of the movie was going to be. And finally, my nice thing to say, number 10. All right, this is actually a little bit of a script doctor because I think that it could have made this movie so much stronger without actually changing that much. And I've already given you a few things that I could change with the movie that we already have. But here's something that I think could have really fixed the story and made it more engaging because it would have given us stakes that tied into the fact that we already know how the ultimate outcome is, but we wouldn't have been able to know the internal outcome. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, my script doctor is like this. I love the idea that Galen Erso was able to like convince an Imperial pilot to like listen to his conscience and do the right thing and take the message to Saw Gerrera. I really, really like that. But what I don't think works is Galen having created the flaw in the Death Star intentionally to make it explodey because it just feels too much like they were trying to fix a problem that fans had, like with the original. My idea, though, is to keep Galen Erso convincing an Imperial pilot to listen to his conscience and do the right thing. But instead of giving him a completely pointless message to take to Saw Gerrera that says, hey, I need you to go find the Death Star plans because I put a flaw in the reactor. So I don't know how you're going to get them, but go get them and exploit the flaw that I made. Like, do you see how that's kind of like a circular and like not very interesting outcome for them to like follow? What I think would have been a lot more engaging and interesting is if Galen had sent the Death Star plans with Bodhi, and that part had been the same, except instead of the message, it's the actual plans. And instead of Galen having intentionally made a flaw, he didn't. He just made it because like that was his job, and he too had the crisis of conscience, right? So instead of him having the crisis of conscience beforehand and then being like, well, if I don't build it, someone else will build it, so I'll build it and I'll build in a flaw, which is very like Deus Ex Machina. Um, I say that Galen sends the pilot with the Death Star plans, and the message is just like, here's the Death Star plans. Like, I hope there's something you can figure out to destroy it. And then the characters have to be the ones to go forth and figure out how to read the plans and how to get certain information to connect things within the plans. And, it would make more sense to have Bodhi and K2SO. Do you follow me here? How that would have been a much richer story because then the characters would have actually had to do something that required like doing something and we could have followed along and like we know that there is a flaw that they eventually exploit. Obviously, we've seen A New Hope, but this way, it actually builds some stakes and we get some excitement and some dopamine instead of just watching CGI spaceships shoot at each other, you know? Alternatively, if you really want to keep the fact that Galen intentionally put the flaw in, then you could have the same message delivered by Bodhi, but instead it like is corrupted or the explosion happens earlier and the message is cut off before Galen is able to tell them what the flaw is, and then they have to figure out, okay, we know that there is a flaw, and now we just have to figure out what the flaw is. And again, it's the exact same as what I just said, where there's actually like stakes and the characters actually have to do something. So those would be my suggestions for making this like an actually like fulfilling movie to watch as an audience member. And it's like it ends the same way it starts, really. Like we went into the movie knowing how the thing was going to resolve, and that's what happened. So, yeah. Well, hopefully nobody wants to kill me still. I really appreciate if you heard me out and listened to the things I had to say. I, again, am normally not a fan of making like just straight up hate videos. I way prefer talking about stuff that I love and enjoyed and got so much experience and knowledge out of. Uh, I am not somebody who generally loves to tear stuff down like this, which is why I still had to do it in the form of a compliment sandwich-ish. Maybe a compliment cracker and cheese, those little, it's like an apple slice and cheese and a cracker rather than like a sandwich. But anyway, Star Wars can be a really touchy subject for a lot of people, and that's fair. You are absolutely always going to be entitled to your feelings, your thoughts, your opinions, and I just really had to share mine because if you spent a decade feeling absolutely insane, like you missed something, and then you watch the movie and it feels like, "Oh no, I'm so validated." You just have to make a video about it. So that's what I did. As always, you are just so appreciated, and I hope that all of you are taking great care of yourselves. You deserve to be happy and healthy.